Thank you. And welcome everybody to this evening's primary assessment Zoom. My name is Daniel Kebede. I am the National President of the NEU. After 2 years of disruption, the government is bringing back SATs and other national primary school tests, which were of course cancelled and not missed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, they're considering further assessments. We think the times are right to evaluate the purpose and relevance of SATs and other high stakes primary assessments. And we are coordinating an independent commission on assessment in primary education to envisage a testing framework more suited to the needs of our children. This webinar will explore the case for change, and it's your opportunity to contribute to the work on the independent commission. This evening, we are joined by some fantastic speakers. We've got Alice Bradbury and Dominic Wyse, the joint chairs of the Independent Commission on Assessment in Primary Education. We're joined by Courtney, our Joint General Secretary, by Quinn, a primary teacher and commissioner, and of course, Jill Robinson from More Than a Score. But to tell you more, I will hand over to our first speaker, which is Courtney, our Joint General Secretary. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and welcome to everybody on the call. And I really want to thank Alice and Dominic for taking on the role of chairing this independent commission, to Jill for being here from More Than a Score, and to Megan as a classroom practitioner also involved in the commission. You may know that Nick Gibb, the longest serving schools minister we've had for a long time, has gone. And that, I think, is welcome to people who are concerned about the pattern of primary assessment, what it's doing to our children, because he was a passionate defender of the system of testing. The question is for us is, will Robin Walker, the new minister, will he listen? Gavin Williamson has gone and nobody's crying tears over that. Nadine Zahawi says he's driven by evidence. Will he appreciate the evidence that we can produce about the negative effects of the testing that we have in our school system? The NEU tries to work in many ways with many allies to try and put right what's going wrong in our schools. And one of the allies we work with is More Than a Score. You'll have seen the work of More Than a Score. It's so welcome for reaching out from beyond the reaches of the NEU to many parents, to many head teachers not in our union. But the other thing that we're trying to do is to shift the terms of the political debate and to set up this commission on primary assessment where the chairs will, they're not driven by NEU head office. They have their own approach to these questions, but we are looking to mobilize the intellectual case for a reform of the way we carry out assessment in schools. And I think we really need the voices of our members in that. Partly, some members want to know what the alternative is. If we're not going to do the SATs, they worry that there'll be a worse alternative. So there's a question about what the alternative is. I think there's also the question of how we talk about the fact that we as teachers invented testing. We aren't against assessing children. We aren't against testing children. The question is the assessment appropriate? Is it achieving something that's worthwhile to achieve? And there are so many tests that there are so many different ways of looking at this subject. The test that you set for a class in year 5 on a Friday afternoon to see if they've listened, to ask them to revise something that you've been doing with them in the week. We're not against that form of testing. The formative assessment, where you set children something so that you can see what they've learned, so you can adjust your teaching of them. We're absolutely not against that form of assessment, against that form of testing. There are alternatives to the current system that we have, as well as those forms of testing. The notion, perhaps, of doing a random sample test across schools to see how the whole education system is doing. There are ways of organizing summative assessment at the end of a period of learning that are far less damaging than the assessment systems that we have at the moment. We can see not only implications for children in the way we currently assess them, but also implications for teachers in the whole system of SATs and league tables that we think needs to be explored. when you look at international comparisons, then the TALIS survey conducted last in 2018 by the OECD, the Teaching and Learning International Survey, it compares teaching and learning in very many OECD countries. So it's an extremely reputable body, the OECD, as far as it also runs the PISA test. We don't always agree with everything that we see from the PISA test. The TALIS survey, we do think there's lots in that that's worth looking at. And it reveals that teaching, maybe this is a bit more about GCSE, but it comes from the same origins, that teaching in England is far more driven by rote memorization than in our competitor countries. So preparation for the test. We can also see in the TALIS survey that there is far more supervision, monitoring of teachers than in other countries. We have somehow built in a lack of trust of teachers into the way we run education in our country. And we think that's what drives the excessive workload and drives the excessive teacher turnover. Now, that's going a bit away from the purpose of this meeting, but these things are all related. You can't design an education system, one part of an education system, without seeing there are implications elsewhere. So we're in favor of testing, we're in favor of assessment, but we want to know what the purpose is of the test or the assessment. What does it generate that's good for the system, that's good for the child? And that brings me to SATs. It brings me to the phonics check. It brings me to the multiplication check. And what is the purpose of those assessments? And we know from their own words, we know from the way Nick Gibb talked about SATs, that the purpose of the SATs tests is not to assess children. It is to assess schools. That's the point of the whole setup. And there are better ways of doing that that don't drive the whole of year 6 to just be preparation for a test. If we weren't using these systems, we wouldn't be having to teach children about fronted adverbials, where Nadim Zahawi doesn't know what a fronted adverbial is, and nor should he. I mean, I think I do. I think it's starting a sentence with an adverb. So amazingly, I think a sentence that starts with amazingly is a sentence with a fronted adverbial in it. But why you would think that learning that fact is as any contribution to making a child a better writer, rather than getting them to write sentences with amazingly at the front of them, there is no purpose to it. And the people who designed these tests admitted that at the time. The reason that Nick Gibb wanted fronted adverbials in, it was easy to test and therefore easy to get a league table from. So we are distorting the real provision of education to our children in order to create a system which tests you, which ranks schools in league tables, which isn't about assessing children. And it's the same with the phonics check. The phonics check exists to groom you into teaching children through phonics. And when you look at well, I've looked several times and shared on social media several times. If you look at the number of children who don't pass the phonics check and you break that out by their month of birth, then you find there is a straight line graph that a certain small number of children who are born in September don't pass the phonics check. And it goes up month by month until the number of children who don't pass the phonics check who are born in August is the highest of all. And that tells you it's measuring the age of the child more than anything else. And the worry for me is that all those August-born children are being told, and a lot of them are told, their parents are told, that they haven't met the standard. And there is nothing in the instructions to schools, unless this has changed recently. When I last looked at it, there is nothing in the instructions to schools that says to the school, you should say to the parent, your child probably hasn't met the standard because they're younger than other children. There's nothing to worry about. They will catch up. So there are real distortions that happen to our teaching. Then the information that we give to the parents, the distress to a child who will find out from their parent, in many cases, they haven't met the standard. That's not supportable in my view. The multiplication check, we all know, is the same thing. It's put there in order to dragoon you into teaching for the times tables. I want children to learn times tables, but the overload of putting everyone through these tests just in order that somebody top down from the department tries to describe how you teach, that's what's going wrong in our education system. That's where all the workload is coming from. So I want to thank you all for being on this call tonight. Other people are going to explain much better than me how the Commission is going to work and how you can feed into it. We want the Commission to have the voice of you as practitioners. We want your voice to shape the alternatives that the Commission proposes. We want your voice to shape the criticism of the existing system that the Commission will look at. We want the Commission to be a solid intellectual case that we can use to shift the terms of the political debate. And I will just end by telling you that we do have MPs in all political parties, including the Conservative Party, who are talking to us about the fact that primary assessment isn't working. And they may not be currently in ministerial positions, but in all political parties, there are people talking to us. We need your engagement in order to shift the numbers on that and bring this system, bring the reforms to primary assessment that we so sorely need. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. There will be time for your questions to be answered at the end of this section, but we'll move over to our next speaker. I hope you all support the campaign More Than a Score, and we're really pleased to have Jill Robinson from More Than a Score with us. So over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you all very much for having me along today. I can't tell you, the NEU is an amazing supporter of More Than a Score. And if there is anyone who don't know who we are here, that doesn't know who we are, More Than a Score is a campaign working to change the way primary school children are assessed and the way primary schools are held accountable. We've got over 60,000 active supporters, including teachers, heads, parents, academics, and MPs from all parties. This school year, as you all know, has seen a doubling of the number of statutory assessments in primary schools because of the introduction of baseline, the autumn phonics check, and the new times tables test. Some year 2 children who have never experienced a full year in school will take 3 sets of tests before their 7th birthday. 10 and 11-year-olds whose last full year in school was year 3 face 4 days of SATs in just a few weeks' time. And this is taking a huge toll on both teachers and children. In our campaigning, we build awareness of and opposition to the current system with all stakeholders, and we provide an ongoing critique of the issues. We work hard to bring together policymakers, educators, and the public to support our work. And recently, and Kevin mentioned this as well, we've also been demonstrating that alternatives to SATs do exist. The More Than a Score campaign is not just based on the belief that the current system is fundamentally flawed, but it's also based on hard evidence. We conduct regular research to make sure our arguments are evidence-based and up to date. And today, I'm just going to share a few slides with you, which will show you some of our brand new research. Just let me share my screen. Hopefully that's up there. First, we wanted to find out what effects preparing for SATs is having in schools. We worked with TeacherTapp and we surveyed over 1,000 heads, SLTs, and teachers in years 5 and 6. This is what we found out. Only 8% of heads and teachers think that preparing for SATs is helping learning. 1 in 3 heads have been contacted by parents worried about the specific effects of SATs on their child's well-being. And 75% of heads and teachers don't think there's enough time to cover the Key Stage 2 curriculum in sufficient depth ahead of SATs week. And I'm sure a lot of these experiences will be familiar to many of you. I also wanted to share with you some recent research, which you might not have seen because it's from the NEHT. They spoke to 2,000 of their members, and this is what they had to say. So overwhelmingly, an overwhelming majority do not want this year's SATs tests to go ahead. Only a tiny minority believe that they'll be a reflection of school performance. And despite so-called assurances from the DFE, heads are very sceptical about how the data will be used by Ofsted. We've also taken the opportunity to speak to some Year 6 children to find out how they're feeling about getting ready for SATs. Before I go into this in any more detail, I just want to remind you that all of our campaigning is pointed towards the government. We are absolutely not campaigning against teachers who we know are doing an incredible job every day. But we asked over 1,000 10 and 11-year-olds, and this is what they had to say. So 60% of them are worried about taking SATs. 1 in 10 aren't sleeping well because of that worry. For many, Year 6 has been all about doing SATs practice papers. And so it's not surprising that half also aren't enjoying school as much as they used to. And finally, we worked with a charity called Parentkind, and Parentkind represents the country's PTAs, and they are advocating for a greater voice from parents in school life. The reason we wanted to work with Parentkind is we wanted to debunk one of the greatest myths about SATs. And we hear this a lot across the board, but often from MPs, which is that parents support the tests and league tables, and parents support all the other justifications given by the government. So what do parents actually think? Well, according to a survey of 1,800 parents, SATs have a negative impact on children's well-being. They don't provide useful information about how well their child is doing at school. They're not a useful way to judge a school's performance. And therefore, no surprise at all, parents don't even look at SATs when they're choosing a school. So taken all together, these are powerful statistics. Even in the current quite cramped, limited space for media coverage, we had some good national media coverage on this research last week, and we're going to be continuing to spread the word. We've really intensified our focus on Westminster, talking directly to MPs from all parties, including recently Education Select Committee members, Conservative MPs, and the Shadow Education team. I know that you're here to hear about the new commission, but we want to keep up this pressure in Westminster. So I'm going to do a short advertising break here. Westminster needs to hear from those who know children and education best, and that's you. So please do support our work. We've got a Write to Your MP campaign running at the moment, which you can find on your website. On our website. So please write and encourage your colleagues to do the same. MPs need to hear about the reality of school life. And thank you once again to the NEU for this opportunity to speak to you all today. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you for all that you're doing with More Than a Score. It's an absolutely vital campaign, a united movement against SATs and testing in primary schools. Is exactly what we should all be getting involved in. I can't see any questions in the Q&A yet. So I'm, just putting an appeal out to all those listening. If there's anything that sort of generates some sort of question, don't be afraid to pop it in the Q&A. There will be time to ask it. Our next speaker is a primary teacher in Camden. So over to you, Megan Quinn.
Hi, hello. It's really good to be here speaking with the other people here at this webinar. I am a primary teacher in Camden. I teach at a 2-form entry school. I've spent most of my career in Key Stage 2. So I've always been very familiar with the, the pressures of the SATs. I was in Year 6 for 3 years, in 2016 as well, when there were big changes made to assessment. But for the last 2 years, I've actually been teaching in reception. So I sort of come to this meeting with an early years perspective in terms of current assessment. And I just want to talk a little bit, first of all, about the baseline assessment, because that's something that I have had direct experience of this year. the reintroduction of the baseline assessment, despite the campaigns against that, meant that within the first 6 weeks of the children that I teach this year starting school in September, they were assessed in literacy and in maths as well. And this assessment is on top of the other changes that have happened in early years this year. So changes to the early learning goals and the non-statutory guidance that's in place as well, that teachers and school leaders are sort of getting their heads around, and changes to early reading and this pressure in terms of the type of phonics teaching that we're doing in schools as well. But in terms of baseline assessment, myself and my colleague, it was around 20 hours in total. So for 2 weeks, we spent 2 hours each morning with the children, one-to-one, carrying out these assessments in literacy and maths. There are so many different levels that I disagree with the baseline assessment. I guess one of them is that it just wasn't useful for us as teachers. So the way that we would talk about it is as an interruption to the settling in process. You know, these children that have been through so much in the last couple of years, in those first 6 weeks of school, to have to be, you know, have to do this assessment in quite a sterile and alien way, it felt as well. I feel what Kevin said is really important. It's not that we're against assessment, you know, formative assessment is part of what we do all the time, but actually for a child in their first 6 weeks of school to be potentially faced with questions that they're not ready for, to be questioned about learning that they haven't experienced, it's, you know, unfair for them and not useful for us. I want the children at that point to know that I care about them, that I'm pleased that they're part of the school, that I want to get to know them and their families, that I remember what they said yesterday and I've put a learning opportunity in place for them as a result of it, you know, the next day. But I think also the purpose of the baseline assessment is a really important issue. I feel that the work that More Than a School would do is absolutely vital in terms of raising awareness with parents, because the purpose of assessment is so central to this discussion. And if we've got assessments in place in primary schools that teachers are saying are not only not beneficial to them, but are actually hindering them meeting the needs of the children that they teach and are dictating the types of learning that are in place and the curriculum, then that is, you know, that's a real issue. I think that we've got so many challenges in schools at the moment, you know, the continued disruption caused by staff shortages. We've had redundancies at our school recently as well. So there are huge, huge pressures, and I'm really pleased to be part of this commission. I think it's desperately needed. I hope that I can, as a commissioner, bring a full-time classroom practitioner's voice to the commission. And I really would like to encourage primary members and fellow teachers to get involved and to share their views as part of that. I think it's not an easy time necessarily to speak out. I think that we've got a lot of power as a collective, though. I think that there are a lot of really great creative approaches in schools and people who are really passionate about because I think there's I'll just end on this. I think there's something that we really need to challenge is this idea that if you are anti the current forms of assessment, you are not pro high standards. And I actually think that the teachers that I know who are very passionate about assessment reform, actually what drives that is the very, very high standards that they've got of themselves and the education that they want for the young people in their care.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was absolutely superb, and I agreed with everything you said. So We'll now go over to our next speaker, Alice Bradbury. So welcome, Alice.
Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you for inviting us along to talk to everyone. My name's Alice Bradbury. I'm a professor of sociology of education at IOE, and I've been researching issues of primary education policy and early years policy, particularly with a focus on assessment, for about 14 years. So I've done research on the EYFS profile, on baseline, working with NEU, and on SATs, again, working with more than a score, on the phonics screening check. So I feel like I'm the one who's a bit obsessed with primary statutory assessment. I've also kind of written related things about the datification of primary and early years. So our kind of the kind of power of data to shift how teachers teach and their kind of priorities and practices as well, which kind of runs through a lot of the research I've done about statutory assessments. In a past life, I was a primary teacher as well. So I've been the year 6 teacher who's there giving out SATs papers every day. So, and I'm also a parent. I've got one of my children at the moment going through the year 1 phonics screening check preparation. So I have kind of a range of perspectives on all this. Dominic and I are chairing this commission together. We're going to both speak for a couple of minutes. What we see really as the kind of biggest issues in assessment at the moment are the sheer dominance of statutory testing and its impact, the effect on the curriculum, the effect on children and teachers, how it encourages other summative data, assessment and breeds assessment, so that the more you feel the need to track children, the more often you need to do it, and so on. So that kind of power of statutory assessment to affect all of our kind of practices, not just in those year groups, but in general. And also this growth in assessment that is really not very useful to teachers. So baseline is the perfect example. The teachers can't even use it, but also the phonics screening check and the multiplication tables check, because teachers know who is able to do those things, who is able to do decoding. They don't need that check to tell them. So that kind of use of those sort of particular assessment is, I think, for me, a really concerning issue. One of the great challenges, and we appreciate politically there are real challenges, is in this kind of dominance of the idea that if you don't want assessment, or statutory assessment, then you don't have high standards, or that there is a kind of this discourse of standards just sort of trumps everything. And Dominic and I have done some recent work on phonics, and the immediate reaction we were questioning based on research, questioning the dominance of phonics teaching within the teaching of reading. And the immediate response from the DFE was, well, phonics screening check scores have gone up, which we felt just missed the point completely. We were not talking about whether people were good at phonics, we were talking about whether it's the best approach. So there are some real challenges, I think, politically, to try and get out of that loop of constantly, being labelled as not caring. Our hope for the commission is that we can produce something really collaborative. So we really do want to engage with members and teachers beyond the NEU as well, of course, using our kind of knowledge of the research data alongside that practical expertise to produce something which we think is actually workable. We don't want something which is just going to make life more difficult for teachers in a different way. That's not the answer. And we want to ultimately find something that is workable in order to reform the current system. Dominic, handing over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alice. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you so much to the NEU for being interested, passionate, and actually action-oriented to get us going on this. My specialism is on curriculum, really. So I'm really interested in how assessment systems at all levels change what children experience as their curriculum. And I'm also particularly interested in how assessment systems drive pedagogy. For more than, since 2001, one of the things I've done is sort of track the political changes in relation to policy and in terms of the extent to which DFE controls what you as teachers do, what you as professionals do. And I can still remember my own, frankly, fury when the very first modern national curriculum, 1988, came in, and I was talking today to the commissioners about how I did floating and sinking as a statutory assessment with my year 2 children. I had a mixed year 1 and year 2 class. And I still have a little bit of that fury and a bit of shock that the tide has continued to flow, as I see it, to greater control by the DfE. And on all sorts of levels, I don't think that's healthy. So it's fantastic to get this opportunity to chair such an important commission with Alice. We've had one meeting today, and it was just so wonderful to meet Megan, for example, but all the commissioners properly in that context. And it was such a revealing and exciting conversation to begin. We're also slightly scared of the amount of work and the, what's possible and the challenges, but we like a bit of a challenge. Where do we want to get? Well, I think we want to marry what we know from our research with what is the best of practice. We want to discover new things, not simply tread some very important paths around what's wrong with the system. And we know that there are teachers out there who are doing incredible things with assessment curriculum pedagogy, in spite of the very unhelpful context that they find themselves in. So we really genuinely want to collaborate. With my other hat on at the moment, my president of the British Educational Research Association, I've driven some theoretical work about what we're calling close to practice research. And that, in a nutshell, is practitioners, teachers, working closely with academics who have the right frame of thinking where they understand practice. And not all researchers do understand practice, nor do they necessarily need to. But for this work, it's vital. Where do we want to get finally? Well, it's a vision, isn't it? We've got to think big, we've got to be ambitious, but we've also got to be robustly practical. We've got to recognize and anticipate the challenges and find new ways to undermine the negative things in the system and positively and proactively suggest a new approach. And let's hope that the dreadful events of COVID and so on, which continue in many ways, but there's been definitely a feeling amongst all sorts of groups in society that there's an opportunity and we have to grab it and we have to create something that will have a lasting legacy and hopefully produce change, positive change.
Thank you so much, Dominic, and also Alice. So now we will go to some questions. We do have a few in. I suppose this first question, it might be most appropriate for Megan or possibly Alice or Dominic. It's from Lucy Coleman. And Lucy would like to ask whether there is any thought being given to EYFS-style observational assessments being used further on in primary schools, particularly in Key Stage 1. So who would like to answer that one?
I'm happy to talk about that. I think that's a really interesting point of view, because actually in our first commission meeting today, we were discussing how perhaps there are some things to learn from practice in early years for higher up the school. My slight concern is that we know, of course, that there is a huge workload implication with the way in which the EYFS profile, for example, has been used in the past, not necessarily now, but in terms of the amount of evidence people felt they needed to collect. So I think although that is a good idea, it certainly isn't simple to sort of transfer those ideas to different year groups. Maybe Megan, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot just in terms of the cohort of children that I taught last year, because they have gone up to year 1 and are grappling with a curriculum that is so inappropriate for many of them. I certainly think that it is the practice that exists in early years, thinking about that as a style of assessment, and how different that is from the assessment that exists in the rest of, the rest of primary school, is a really important thing to do. I think so much of my experience is in Key Stage 2, but what I've found over the last couple of years is how much the child is the starting point in my in planning and learning, and I feel that that drawing on what happens in early years feels important.
Thanks very much.
I like just to chip in as well, because it reminded me of being involved in the other NEU commission to do with secondary qualifications and assessment and so on. And I remember then that the idea of portfolios, or ways, frankly, of genuinely celebrating and recognising all children, pupils, students' achievements are so important. And so and the other thing is we will talk about primary education as a special phase that we think has been a bit neglected in some ways. So it will be driven by the best of thinking in primary education, and we'll necessarily, take account of the stages before and after.
Thank you, Dominic, Megan and Alice. Another question that does sort of follow on from Miss Lambie says, hi, I'm a reception teacher in Harrow in London. I totally agree with everything current speakers saying about teaching in reception. So I wanted to ask whether the baseline test will be part of the independent commission review. That's perhaps best to our commissioners.
I think it was Megan who was talking at the time. But certainly while you're on mic, certainly I think it's fair to say we will definitely be looking at baseline. I'll say that much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, the baseline will definitely be part of it. And it's, really important that we look at what's happening in early years. Absolutely.
And we also discussed today about also recognising the sort of washback effect into nursery, of course, of all the statutory assessments that happen in reception in year 1. We also want to recognise that those year groups are not immune from statutory testing.
Thanks, Alice. Kevin.
I mean, I'm not the expert on this. I was never a primary teacher, and I'm not the expert that Alice and Dominic are. But it seems to me that baseline is the most egregious of the systems that we've got, because the assessment happens with the teacher and the child, and then no results of it are fed back at any stage. As I understand it, the results are effectively put in an envelope for 7 years and only taken out to compare that child, that cohort of that child, with the cohort that leaves the school at the end of Key Stage 2. And its only purpose is to compare the school at the start and the end. And so there is no purpose ascribed to the baseline test that is to give information to the teacher, so that there's nothing there to learn from. Am I right? Is that still the case with this test, which seems shocking to me? And not only so, it's not giving it's not giving information to the practitioner in the here and now, or the parent of the child in the here and now. It's not giving any information to inform. And then the idea that you can actually compare a school in 7 years' time, when how many secretaries of state for education will we have been through in that time? How many changes to the Ofsted framework will we have been through in that time? How many changes of head teacher in that school might have happened? How much change is there in the pupil? How many children have left the school and been replaced by other children? It seems completely devoid of any merit to me at all. The others do as well, but I certainly think that the baseline should be part of any systematic look at how we're assessing children in primary schools.
Thanks, Kevin. I saw Megan wanting to come in, and I think we'll go over to Jill for some thoughts on baseline. So, Megan.
Oh, I just wanted to say quickly, our assessment lead discovered a function where you could print out some information from the baseline assessment, but it was very vague and not particularly useful. So that that didn't give us anything that was particularly useful either.
Thank you, Megan. Jill, any thoughts on baseline generally?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate what everyone else said. My understanding, to just reinforce what Megan said, is that there is apparently they give what is called a narrative feedback to teachers, which might say something like, Daniel recognised fewer than 10 numbers. And that would literally be it. And also just to reinforce Kevin's point, which is that you've got a 20-minute test taken at the age of 4, and then that used as a comparative measure to 4 days of tests taken at the age of 11. And we have asked the DFE multiple times for the methodology of how that's going to happen, and they have been unable or unwilling to answer that question.
I mean, the idea that you can compare and measure and children learn in this linear way is completely flawed. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. Would anybody like to pass some final comments before we close on the commission, or anything else to say? Oh, hang on, I'm getting told there are some more questions. Oh, I shall have a look for these to arrive. Okay, I've got a question here. More Than a Score have been doing wonderful work in raising awareness for years. All those tests and assessments have been opposed for just as long, if not longer. Okay, now that question has disappeared. Dear me.
It's in the answered section, Daniel, if you look in the answer
question. Okay, right, okay. Oh, right, yes. We all have known for years that they're only used to measure schools. So my question is, what is looking into them going to change, and what action will be taken to make a real difference in practice? Okay, anybody like to take that on? Might be a good question for you, that, Kevin. What are we practically going to do? Yeah,
I mean, it is a good question. The vast majority of practitioners know these tests haven't been working. Their union knows that they haven't been working. I think the NAHT knows they haven't been working. We boycotted them in 2010 was the last time there was a boycott, and the NUT and NAHT both had ballots for boycotts under the existing laws at that time, and about a quarter of schools boycotted them at that stage. That didn't shift the government either. So it is a long struggle that we're engaged in. But I think what we all sense is there is some more appetite to look again at what education is doing. And Jill reported the increased engagement we're getting from some parliamentarians across the political divide. So it's not, we all wish that we could find a way of changing these things much more quickly. But we think this is an important stage. Get in membership engagement, the engagement of the profession, as I think it might have been Alice that said, we're open to this being to receiving views from teachers who aren't in the NEU. We want to engage with the whole of the profession. We think that going through the process of engagement, then the process of producing a report, then the process of taking that report out. And it's not going to be the NEU's, when there's going to be a proper process of engagement, of producing something of real merit with this, and it will help all of those arguments. And I think, like Jill was saying earlier, we will be also coming back to members saying, we need your engagement with what we've brought with what the Commission comes out with. We want your engagement in taking that to your local MP and saying, you really have to listen. And who knows how far we'll get with this. But if we don't try, we will never succeed. We are trying to make a change for the better.
Thanks, Kevin. And Jill, over to you about what we can practically do, because of course, More Than a Score is a national campaign on this issue. So how can people get practically involved with you?
Thanks, Daniel. Please sign up if you're not already, please sign up to join our mailing list. please write to your MP. It really is a numbers game. You may think that if you have a Conservative MP that they're not going to respond, but we are making headway in Westminster. We have spoken to more Conservative MPs than Labour MPs in the last 3 months. And they are interested in having a discussion about the issue. There is movement at a secondary level with all of the various commissions that have been reporting. I know Dominic knows a lot about that, but there's been a lot of movement in terms of GCSEs, and some shift in policy there I think may well happen. It's really important that primary doesn't get left behind, and we need to have people speaking out as loudly as they possibly can. And from the point of view of those of you in the profession, that is about making sure that your specific voices are heard. On the ground reporting is what we need. Nadeem Sahawi keeps saying he will listen to evidence. You've seen that we've been producing new evidence, reams of new evidence, and we need that backed up by the voices of teachers as well. So anything you can do to join our campaign, please do.
Thank you very much, Jill. Absolutely. Support more than a score. And final comments from our commissioners. We'll go to Dominic, Alice as joint chairs, and then Megan, and then we shall end the call. So final comments from our commissioners.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all these questions. This really just feeds our excitement for taking this forward. Today we discussed many things, and we arrived on one vitally important thing. What do we want the children coming out of primary schools, getting the end of primary school, what do we want them to know, be like? In other words, what are our purposes for primary education? And never mind the rest of the system for now. So I've got 3 questions I'd love you to engage with over the time of the commission, and let us know your thoughts. First one is, what are the things that are most important to assess in primary education? The next one is, how could assessment support the process of learning? And finally, what kind of practical strategies can we use to ensure that assessment reflects the whole child and the whole curriculum?
And finally, I just want to thank everyone for being engaged, and hopefully continuing to be engaged with the Commission as we go forward via the website and various regional groups and so on. I think one thing just to clarify is that we are interested in assessment in its kind of broadest sense. So we're not just talking about statutory assessment, but also about how assessment is used in the classroom, the relationships between those two. So we're being quite ambitious in our kind of our scope, the whole of primary, and obviously the kind of all kind of forms of assessment. But that second question that Dominic has said about how could assessment support the process of learning is really fundamental, I think, to the work of the Commission, because we want to not do away, as we said, with assessment completely, but have assessment which is there to aid learning rather than simply to be providing data for the DFE. Megan, we'll leave you with the final words.
I'm really pleased, as I've already said, to be part of the Commission, and I'm looking forward to having conversations with my colleagues about it and talking to other teachers in Camden about how they can get involved. I think there are serious issues with assessment in primary education. I think that we are in pretty desperate need for reform, but I think that conversations with fellow teachers is just such an important thing for us to do, so that we can share the challenges, we can support each other with those challenges, and we can also share share the potential for alternatives and the things that are going on to develop those alternatives too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Alice, Dominic, Jill, and Kevin, and thank you to everyone who has been on the call this evening. Look, I'm a primary teacher. I actually teach secondary at the moment. I've had the privilege from teaching early years all the way through to Key Stage 4. And one thing I've noticed as children get older, the love of learning gets lost, and it is because of our assessment regime that is happening. So please, please, please support the Commission, support organisations like More Than a Score, and let's change the system of assessment in education, because it doesn't have to be this way. It's not like this elsewhere in the world, and we can regain the joy in school. So thanks very much, everybody, and see you all soon.